May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we're excited to celebrate AAPI contributions to our nation's history and culture. Check out our book lists for all ages, programs, and more at queenslibrary.org. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. Teens, learn how to maintain your mental health and support your friends with activities, book lists, programs, and resources, especially for you, all month long. Learn more at queenslibrary.org. Step up to the plate and get your QPL Special Edition Mets Library Card. Current QPL cardholders and new card applicants can get this free card at any QPL location. Learn more at queenslibrary.org/Mets and check out our amazing array of free books and services at Queens Public Library.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Mike Rinder, author of A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. Kirkus Reviews states, Rinder's voice is crisp, urgent, and vividly impassioned. Whether assessing his years as a compliant member, his breathless escape, or his promise to continue exposing Scientology as a unique and vengeful monster, an intensely personal, cathartic memoir of blind allegiance, betrayal, and liberation. Leah Remini, actress and New York Times bestselling author of Troublemaker, says, few people understand Scientology like Mike Rinder does. In A Billion Years, he tells the gripping, harrowing account of growing up in Scientology, serving founder L. Ron Hubbard, and rising to the top of its ranks. Mike has found purpose in his pain, and his book offers not only a cautionary tale, but also an inspiring story of resilience. Lawrence Wright, New York Times bestselling author of Going Clear, exclaims, a candid and deeply felt memoir of a life lost to false belief and courageously regained. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Penk, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, and have recently co-adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, the queer reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Mon, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Marrier Media in 2011. It is currently streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performer Non Grata, was released in April by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Mike Rinder was raised as a Scientologist from early childhood. He went on to serve as Scientology's international spokesperson and as the head of its Office of Special Affairs, and was a member of the board of directors of the Church of Scientology International from its creation in 1983 until he left in 2007. Since renouncing Scientology, Rinder has become a prominent whistleblower against its abuses. He appeared in the HBO documentary Going Clear and co-hosted all 3 seasons of the Emmy Award-winning show Leah Remini's Scientology and the Aftermath on A&E. He and Remini currently co-host the podcast Scientology Fair Game. Mike, thank you so very much for joining us. It's an honor.
Oh, you're very welcome, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Even though we all know a great deal about Scientology, what with the documentary and your book and several other books in the last 7 or 8 years, really only, so few of us really understand the central beliefs. I know a good deal of it centers on the reactive mind and engrams and saving mankind from our own nature. We don't have an awful lot of time, but can you maybe just give us a very brief summary of some of these ideas?
Sure. I'll try and do what Scientology really never has been able to do, which is to sum up Scientology in simple terms. It is a method that was developed by L. Ron Hubbard to attain what he claimed is spiritual freedom. And one follows a series of steps in Scientology called the Bridge to Total Freedom.
Mhm.
And the fundamental principles of Scientology are that man consists of three parts: the spirit, or called the thetan in Scientology,
Mhm.
the mind, and the body. And that the spirit is senior to the mind and the mind is senior to the body.
Mhm.
And that by enabling the spirit to regain its lost abilities, you enable the spirit to adequately and correctly control the mind and thus the body, and you can free people from unwanted upsets and emotions as well as unwanted diseases.
Mhm.
All psychosomatic illness, Hubbard claimed, could be cured by the principles that he discovered in Dianetics, all the way to cancer and everything else.
And this idea that we could cure ourselves with our mind, we could cure our own cancer, we give ourselves cancer. This is kind of part and parcel with this system of beliefs. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct, Brian. And in fact, it was one of the sort of strokes of genius that Hubbard had, because his original book, Dianetics,
Mm-hmm.
which is still considered to be the book one of Scientology, basically said, look, you didn't know this, but you have this thing called a reactive mind. And a reactive mind is a subconscious control mechanism that causes you to do things that you don't want to do, to feel ways you don't want to feel, and to have illnesses that you don't want to have. And you didn't know you had that. Now I'm telling you, you do. And I'm telling you the way to relieve or get rid of that is by using Dianetics.
But yeah.
So you're not really responsible for anything bad. It is this reactive mind. And here is a way to get rid of it. Just give us some money and we'll do it.
And, I understand how that could be very attractive to people, this idea of saving yourself from yourself or from this unseen force.
Yes,
So Dianetics was published in 1950. Is that right?
that's
And
correct.
it was kind of a melding of Eastern beliefs, Hubbard's own personal experiences, and also Freud's psychoanalysis, right? Those are the three major sources.
Yes, that's a pretty good summation of it.
What struck me about your beautiful, what's powerful about your book is it's one part memoir, one part sort of cultural dissection, and another part kind of bombshell. Truly, which it's kind of exhilarating to read because it works on all three of those levels. But you open your book with a really intimate moment, a note to your children who are still members of Scientology. When was the last time you spoke with them?
Last time I spoke to my daughter was in 2010 when she came with a number of other Scientology people to try and quote, confront me, to tell me to shut up. That was short-lived. And the last time I spoke to my son was in 2006 before I left.
Wow. And you left in 2007, just to reiterate.
Yes.
You became a Scientologist when you were really just a kid because your parents were Scientologists. And you eventually became a member of Sea Org when you were 17?
Just turned 18.
Just
Brian.
turned 18.
Yep.
Tell us about that. The conditions on the ship, the Apollo, sounded really nightmarish as you described them. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, well, I describe it like the black hole of Calcutta, where I slept. And it was such an incredible dichotomy, because in the minds of Scientologists, this ship was where Hubbard had basically gone to escape government oversight.
Mm-hmm.
He was being pursued by the government in the United Kingdom and the US, and he decided, I'm going to go to sea where no government really has jurisdiction. So he bought this ship that was an old cattle ferry and turned it into his headquarters and the international headquarters of Scientology. And the perception of Scientologists was, well, this place is as close to utopia as you could possibly imagine, because this is where the pinnacle, the top of Scientology and the most dedicated, committed Scientologists are. So it must be heaven on earth. And when I got there, it was pretty shocking to find out what it was really like, and that it was like the first lesson that I had in the world of Scientology, that something can be presented and you can convince people that things are a certain way even when they obviously are not. And this cognitive dissonance is a big part of the world of Scientology. There are people in Scientology that to this day believe that Scientology literally is taking over planet Earth and is accomplishing these incredible things. And it's not anywhere close to that. The Apollo was very like that. It was, this is what the believed state of affairs is versus reality. And when those two things collide in Scientology, reality takes a back seat.
The delusion rules. Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right, Brian. The delusion rules, and you make up reasons and explanations and justifications to explain why what you see before you isn't what is the real state of affairs. What you see before you is actually the hallucination, or the thing that is not important, and what is important is what is in your head.
Mike, can you talk to us about some of the kind of awful things that you were subject to on the Apollo?
Well, honestly, Brian, the Apollo wasn't. The awful things on the Apollo were less awful than the awful things later on. You know, I slept in a bunk to begin with. The room or the location on the ship was called the men's dormitory, and I slept in there with like 60 other men, and there was no air conditioning. There were also no lights, and it was a 7-foot high bulkhead to the ceiling, and there were 3 bunks. Well, I happened to be assigned the middle bunk as the new guy, and that middle bunk was so narrow, I had to get out of the bunk in order to turn over because my hips were too wide to turn over. And, you know, the food was atrocious, and the hours, Sea Org members have always worked 7 days a week from, 8 or 9 in the morning until midnight or thereafter.
Wow.
And many times later on in my Sea Org career, I would sleep an average of maybe 4 hours a night for months on end, and that was not unusual.
Is it fair to say it's a kind of abuse and exploitation?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say it's a form of brainwashing.
Yeah, oh sure.
I mean, sleep deprivation is one of the sort of key elements of controlling someone. You put someone in a regime of constant sleep deprivation, and they become very malleable to being told what to do.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, there's plenty of scientific research to support that for sure. You finally left after 50 years. Was it 50 years?
Well, I left when I was 52, and I came into Scientology when I was 5 or 6. So it was like 40 something years.
Incredible. In 2007, what finally made you say, I've had it, enough, I'm out?
Well, I describe it in my book, but I had this realization that I was defending something that I had not joined the Sea Org and joined Scientology to defend, which was the abuses of the Scientology leader who took over from L. Ron Hubbard, David Miscavige, and that I was being interviewed by a reporter from the BBC who was asking me about the abuses that David Miscavige, physical abuses that David Miscavige was engaged in, and I was denying them. And I was like, I sort of walked away from this last particular interview that I had with him and went, there's something really wrong here. And, things had been going on for some time before that were very disturbing to me. But I felt that I had an obligation to my 2 children and to my wife and the rest of my family, and in some ways an obligation to L. Ron Hubbard, because I had signed a billion-year contract like everybody else does when they join the Sea Org, which is the title of the book.
Yes, and just briefly, if you could tell us about that contract, which speaks to the title of your book.
Well, it is a commitment to serve Scientology for all eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And, Scientologists believe that you live more than one life, your spirit goes on, you get another body, and the contract is obviously not a legally enforceable contract, but it is a commitment. It's you giving your word that you will do anything and everything necessary and needed in order to achieve the aims of Scientology.
I know that Scientologists, once the powers that be deem someone fair game, they could be quite vindictive and retaliation can be severe. What was the immediate reaction once you escaped?
Well, when I first escaped, I didn't really do anything. I didn't really speak out.
They left you alone?
Yes, and they left me alone. I mean, there was another reason for that, which was that I was living at the time with David Miscavige's older brother and his wife, who were very old, dear friends of mine who had left the Sea Org before me.
Right.
And David was worried about, what damage the 3 of us together may be able to do. And I wasn't in any frame of mind of wanting to do anything at that point. So nothing really happened until I was contacted by 2 reporters from at the time, the St. Pete Times, now it's called the Tampa Bay Times, who asked me if I would corroborate information that they had gotten. And that was in 2009. And by that time I had moved to Denver, and they came to Denver to see me. And I told them, look, I don't want to go on the record. I just want to live I want to get my life together. I walked away when I escaped with literally nothing. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any resume. Scientology spokesperson, international spokesperson, isn't much of a resume outside of Scientology. I'd managed to get myself a job selling cars. I had, gotten an apartment. I'd bought a car. I was sort of trying to get on my feet. And
for the first time in your life, by the way. I mean, the first time you're independent. Yeah. At almost 50 years old.
I'd never owned a car. I'd never had my own apartment. I never even cooked for myself.
Right.
I was like learning how to cook eggs. It was a whole new world. But Scientology had private investigators that they had hired who had set themselves actually up in an apartment across from the apartment that I was living in, and were spying on me with their high-powered cameras and following me everywhere I went. And these 2 reporters from the St. Pete Times came to Denver to do an interview with me, basically begging me to go on the record, but other than that, asking me to corroborate information that they had gotten. And a few days after that visit, I was contacted by a Scientology lawyer who said, oh, I just happened to be in town. I'd like to get together with you, which I knew was a lie. And in any event, I met with these two lawyers from Scientology, and they basically threatened me and said, "We know you've been talking to the St. Pete Times." And I said, "Okay, I haven't gone on the record. I'm just corroborating, and things that they have found out that are not true, I'm telling them they're not true."
Mm-hmm.
"Well, do you ever want to see your family again?" And it was this, "Do you really want to go to war with Scientology?"
Right.
And I went, "Okay, I'm not doing this." And so I agreed then to go on the record with the St. Pete Times. From that point, it turned into a a sort of a ridiculous game of Scientology having private investigators following me everywhere I went. I mean, literally, Brian, from following me to pick up my son at school or to the supermarket, to following me all the way to Australia and Ireland and London, and having private investigators stalking me in those places.
Outrageous.
They set up a camera out in a birdhouse outside my house so that they could see who was coming to visit. They were buying my garbage and getting the garbage men to sell it to the private investigators. It was just crazy stuff.
And this is well over a decade. Right now, we're at 16 years since you've left, right? Are you still being hounded or harassed in any way?
These days, it's online.
Mm-hmm.
They've I took so many videos of these foolish PIs and their antics and started putting them up on the internet or giving them to the media, that they realized that probably wasn't a good plan anymore. So now they have, dozens of these websites. Who is Mike Rinder? Who's the real Mike Rinder? The real story of Mike Rinder, that they have paid for, and they fill it full of really outrageous stuff.
These are character assassination attempts, basically.
Oh, not
nonstop.
Not basically, and not attempts. That's just what they are.
They are.
It's and unfortunately, Brian, the poster child for the Scientology anti-Mike Rinder campaign is my daughter, who has this website and Twitter accounts and all of these things that I made reference to having last spoken to her in 2010. And there is this sort of infamous incident that happened when she, my ex-wife, my brother, and 5 senior Scientology executives ambushed me while I was waiting in a parking lot for my wife at the doctor's appointment, and started yelling and screaming at me.
Jesus.
And I happened to be on the phone, ironically, with the same reporter, John Sweeney from the BBC, who was doing a second program that I had agreed to do to sort of make amends for the first one that I did with him. And he recorded it all. And it is the most outrageous thing that you have ever heard. And ultimately, the doctor came out into the parking lot hearing the commotion and asked if she should call the sheriff's department. And the sheriffs came, and half the Scientologists left when they heard her saying, "I'm calling them on the phone." The sheriffs came, they wrote a report. My wife or ex-wife got a graze on her arm. They reported that it was a result of incidental contact in the scuffle. What happened was I tried to leave. I tried to get in my car to leave. They took the keys out of the car. They tried to keep me from closing the doors. Eventually, I made it into the doctor's office. But somewhere in along there was a graze on my ex-wife's arm. They called the paramedics. The paramedics came. It was like the report says pain level on a scale of 0 to 10 is 2, and she didn't want any further treatment, and that they put a Band-Aid on it, and that was done. That now has turned into, in the Scientology smear world, that I am a wife beater and abuser, that I broke her arm, that I caused her permanent neurological damage, that I am a vicious, nasty man who goes around beating up women, and the campaign just keeps going like that.
It's incredible. Mike, there's a lot of information online, and you don't know really what's true or not to the point you just made, really. How many members are there in Scientology, and what is their endowment? Can you give us those answers?
Well, my estimate of the number of members internationally is probably 25,000.
Okay.
And that's based on a lot of factors, but most of the people who have, left the organization and have a good assessment of it all come down in that same region. Some are as high as 40,000, some are as low as 20,000.
And of course, the church inflates that number, though, right?
Oh yeah, they say they got millions,
Millions, yeah.
millions of members. They don't. What they do have is a lot of money. You talk about endowment. My estimate at this point is way in excess of $3 billion.
Remarkable.
And that's because when I left in 2007, I knew it was 2 billion. And I knew that was the total assets and, liquid cash and property holdings, etc., of the organizations were in the region of 2 billion. It's probably closer to 4 billion.
Jesus.
Um,
This is because they tend to attract very wealthy people who will give them a lot of money, right?
well, they must attract very wealthy people because Scientology is expensive.
It's expensive.
You have to pay for participation in Scientology.
The audits, you pay for the audit.
Yeah, for auditing, it's called.
The audit.
Auditing is the term that Scientology uses for counseling.
Right.
And it's one-on-one, and you pay, you can pay $1,000 an hour for that.
God.
An hour.
Okay.
And, more than you would pay a surgeon
Sure.
or, not more than some lawyers, but, pretty up there. And people, in order to ascend this Scientology bridge to total freedom, they've got to spend, to get to the top, hundreds of thousands of dollars to get there.
So the average member of Scientology over the course of, I don't know, a decade or two will spend several $100,000 within that time span to go clear. Is that's the pursuit, right? Is to
yes,
rid yourself of these. Explain that if you could.
Yes, that you're absolutely correct, Brian. Going clear is sort of the first objective, but then there are other ones after that called OT, or operating Thetan.
Right.
And those are even more expensive than getting to clear. Hubbard always had the next thing, the next carrot that was dangling in front of the donkey. And every time he promised, this is what you will achieve in Scientology, or Dianetics to begin with. Like, if you read Dianetics, Brian, you will see it says that if you use my techniques and get rid of your reactive mind, you will have an eidetic memory. You will no longer get colds. You'll be able to throw away your glasses. If you were lame, you'll be able to walk. All of these promises, none of which came true. But then he came up with a new thing and said, yeah, but that's because I've made a new discovery, and the new discovery will get you there. And that process went on for the entirety of Hubbard's life. So there was always something new that needed to be done in order to accomplish what was promised at the last stop.
And we should say, for those people who don't know, L. Ron Hubbard started out as a science fiction and pulp writer, right? So he was a creative storyteller for many decades. I think he was in the Guinness Book of World Records for writing the greatest number of fiction books. Is that right, Mike?
I don't know about the greatest number of fiction books, but yeah, he was a storyteller. And that I say that because that encapsulates the entirety of his life, not just the period where he was writing fiction. When he was writing fiction in Dianetics and Scientology, he was being a storyteller.
Sure.
And when he was talking about his life and regaling the great experiences and accomplishments that he had, he was a storyteller. And there is a wonderful unauthorized biography of L. Ron Hubbard by an English writer called Russell Miller, called Barefaced Messiah, where he went back and tracked down the real truth about L. Ron Hubbard. and it is a startling
Hmm.
and scathing and entertaining read, because you realize when you read, I mean, this guy started telling stories about himself when he was 5 years old,
Yeah.
and he never stopped.
A real fabulist kind of, right? A real
Absolute.
inventor.
That's the perfect word, Brian. Fabulous.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Mike, you knew him, right? I mean, he died
Mhm.
in the early 80s, mid 80s. I have the date here.
84,
84, but you were old enough to have
86.
had some FaceTime with him, right? Can you talk
Oh,
to us
yeah,
a
yeah,
little bit
yeah.
about the man?
Well, like I said, he was a storyteller. He was a larger than life individual. He was large physically.
Mhm.
You know, he was a big guy, big head, you know, loud voice, red hair. You definitely knew when he walked into a room, he basically held court wherever he was, and people would stand around and listen with, you know, jaws agape at his incredible stories. I spent some time with him first on the ship, the Apollo, but I
Mhm.
didn't really interact with him a lot. But then again, he moved to a place in California called La Quinta, which
Mhm.
is out by Palm Springs, and bought a property out there and moved there. And I went there to train specifically with him personally to be one of what he designated his messengers,
Hmm.
the people who were like his most trusted assistants.
Mhm.
And so I spent like sometimes 6, 8 hours a day with him at various times of the day, sometimes
Wow.
at night
Wow.
when he was going to bed, sometimes in the morning, afternoon. And
And he never in those intimate moments, Mike, I'm sorry, he never let down that mask or that performance. He was always on.
absolutely. And I don't even think it was a mask or a
Hmm.
performance, Brian. That was his innate nature.
Hmm.
He was a bullshitter.
Yeah.
Like, excuse my French.
Yeah, no.
That's a more accurate Queen's word for storyteller.
Mhm.
He was a bullshitter, and he was very, very good at it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like he was a stupid person.
Right.
He
No, he
was
couldn't have been.
very, very calculating and capable of presenting things in a fashion that seemed very, very credible. And, you know, in the end, I really think he bought his own bullshit.
Hmm.
Like,
He succumbed to his own delusions, maybe, you know? Yeah.
that's exactly right. I mean, at the very end of his life, when he was in hiding from the US government and out in this motorhome on a property in the middle of California, he was still convinced that this story that he had created about the operating thetan levels of this evil galactic overlord Xenu, who had sent all of us here to Earth as a prison and had blown us up in volcanoes with hydrogen bombs 75 million years ago. And I'm not.
No, I know. This is
This
the
is
core of the beliefs. Yeah.
right. This is
Yeah.
the South Park. This is what Scientologists
Yeah.
really believe,
Yeah.
and it is.
It's
And Hubbard was still those spirits that were blown up in Scientology are called body thetans or BTs. Hubbard was still looking for BTs. He was still trying to rid himself of BTs to the last days of his life.
right. I remember this from Going Clear, the documentary on HBO.
Yes.
So, Mike, I'm thinking about Scientology. I'm also thinking about organizations like EST or Landmark Forum or Nexium or Objectivism and the power that they have over people. Why is Scientology so successful? Why does it have an almost $4 billion endowment? Why does it attract so many followers?
I think that two things that Hubbard did that those others that you just mentioned didn't do. Number one, he called it a religion.
Hmm.
And that afforded, I mean, if Keith Raniere had managed to sort of put aside his ego and decide that he had actually founded a new religion and had sought the protection of the courts under the First Amendment, he probably would have gotten away with everything that he
Wow.
did. Because David Miscavige has done the same stuff, and
Right.
no, not he hasn't he hasn't branded women, but the control and Hubbard and his control of people and brainwashing them into thinking that he was some sort of a guru leader. He did the same thing. And I think secondly, one of the things that Hubbard did, and I alluded to this, was he was very, very clever in presenting and convincing people that he had answers that they could use to help themselves.
Mhm.
And he had this second sort of stroke of genius, which was, and I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, but creating this thing in Scientology called the E-meter.
Right. Yes.
And the E-meter is a device that Scientologists use that is actually it's just a Wheatstone bridge. It just measures electrical resistance, but there is a small current pass through your body. You hold these cans, and there is a person there with this meter. And it's funny when you look at Scientology does these slick-looking ads all the time, and for the Super Bowl and various other, and their Scientology TV, and you see this E-meter all the time, and nobody ever explains it. It's just there, and it's like this sort of, ooh. Well, the incredible value of the E-meter in Scientology is that Hubbard has convinced Scientologists that the E-meter can identify their thoughts and feelings better than they can.
Right.
And that it measures your emotional state and reactions below your consciousness slightly.
Wow.
So you are always at the mercy of what the counselor or auditor in Scientology is telling you is happening on the E-meter, because you're not seeing it.
Right.
So they are able to guide you and control you with this E-meter, and it is
it's a very powerful tool.
It is a very powerful tool, and it is was one of his great strokes of genius.
How many people do you think, Mike, are able to get out like yourself? If you have do you have a figure? Do you know how many?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that there are two things to this. One is escaping from the Sea Org is one thing. Getting out of Scientology, if you're not in the Sea Org, is another. Because if you're not a Sea Org member, you're just a regular Scientology, what they call parishioner. You continue to live in your own house, you have your own job, you have a life outside of Scientology, and you go participate in it. And there's pretty draconian sort of requirements for your participation, both monetarily and time-wise, but you're not sort of held captive. And I think that the answer to the question is how many people escape is, at this point, more people than come in. Scientology is getting smaller. I'm not sure that the Sea Org per se is getting smaller. Probably the Sea Org is shrinking, but not as fast as the general population of Scientology. The internet and information is the poison that ultimately kills every cult, and it is killing Scientology.
Wow. In 1986, there's a struggle for power because, of course, L. Ron Hubbard, as you said a minute ago, passed away. David Miscavige, of course, ended up emerging victorious as the leader. You described him as abusive. He was physically abusive. He was verbally abusive. And he was prone to sort of paranoid fits, right? I think it's safe to say.
very
there's been a lot of talk about his wife Shelley,
yes.
who went missing, or who has been declared missing officially, right, for the past 15 or so years. Do you have any insight into what's going on with her, or if she's
Well,
okay?
no, I don't have any insight into whether she is okay or not. I certainly have insight into what her kind of what happened to her and her mindset, having known her for as long as I have known her. She displeased her husband David by questioning him or challenging him in some way. And interestingly, Brian, L. Ron Hubbard's wife went the same route. L. Ron Hubbard's wife became persona non grata to L. Ron Hubbard. He had her basically imprisoned in a house in Los Feliz after she got out of federal prison because she was convicted of having infiltrated the United States government. And he abandoned her, and she was never seen publicly again, and he never saw her again. And Shelley was whisked away to a property that is owned by one of the Scientology corporations that is very remote up in the mountains in San Bernardino. It has super, super high security, and she was put there and effectively held. But I don't believe that they needed to hold her in handcuffs. You've got to understand the mindset of a truly dedicated Scientologist and someone who was literally raised at the knee of L. Ron Hubbard. Shelley's parents abandoned her, sent her to the Apollo when she was 12 or 13. And her parents were L. Ron Hubbard and Mary Sue Hubbard. And I don't mean that literally.
No.
They were the people,
adopted. Sure.
Her parent figures.
Sure.
Her father figure was L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
She felt an incredible loyalty to him. Hubbard convinced all Scientologists that he would be coming back to reassume control once a certain amount of time had passed. I believe that Shelley at the outset, and maybe even to this day, is waiting for him to return and feels that she must be loyal to her commitment to him to serve Scientology for 1 billion years. And couple that with the idea in Scientology that is heavily inculcated, that comes after you learn about Dianetics. Oh, it's not your fault. And then suddenly everything is your fault. In fact, it is to the extent that if Scientologists believe that if you got run over by a car walking on the street today, that you have to go figure out what you did running someone else over in a car that caused you to receive that.
In a previous incarnation, right? Yeah.
Yeah, or yesterday. I mean, it can be any time, but anything negative that happens to you, you in Scientology look inward to find, what did I do to pull this in? And so Shelley being banished in disgrace, she has probably spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, what did I do? And not what did someone do to me, but what did I do? And coupled with the dedication to L. Ron Hubbard, and she doesn't really have anywhere to go in the world.
Poor
This
woman.
has been her entire world since she was 12.
It's very sad.
It is.
I have to ask you about Tom Cruise, because that's what's on everybody's mind. Of course, he's probably the most famous exponent. He joined in 1987. I know that it's explored in the film Going Clear that Scientologists helped broker the relationship between himself and Nicole Kidman. Her father was a psychiatrist, and psychiatry is the enemy of Scientology. So at a certain point, after they were making Eyes Wide Shut in England for Stanley Kubrick, was it Miscavige who kind of went in and facilitated the breakup, and then also helped broker the relationship with Katie Holmes years later?
Okay.
Speak to me about all of this. There's so many big sort of plot points here.
Yes, there is. And I can't speak to Katie Holmes because that happened after I had escaped.
Right.
But I can certainly speak to Nicole. Yes, Tom Cruise was brought into Scientology by his first wife, Mimi,
Amy
who
Rogers.
was raised a Scientologist by a very prominent Scientology auditor, Phil Spickler.
Mhm.
And Tom Cruise, had a sort of meteoric rise as a film star, and it was sort of concurrent with him joining Scientology.
Yeah.
He then, like you said, went off to make Days of Thunder and fell in love with Nicole and wanted to have a relationship with her. And David Miscavige orchestrated the divorce of Tom and Mimi because he believed that bringing Nicole in and adding her star power to the Tom Cruise star power would be good for Scientology. And it was.
Yeah.
The problem, as you said, Nick had a dad who was not a big fan of Scientology. Mm-hmm. She progressed a considerable way, but never had the I don't know, the enthusiasm that Tom displayed for the subject, partly because that's kind of not her nature, partly because she's Australian, partly because she's sort of a very smart, level-headed person. And, what happened that resulted in the end of their marriage, I don't have a great deal of information about. I know that Scientology was helping Tom by spying on her in order to gather information to give him grounds for divorce. But subsequent to that, he then took up with his next, co-star, Penelope Cruz. Mm-hmm. And Penelope, for a while, was sort of sucked into Scientology, but didn't really take it hook, line, and sinker. And then she decided, this is not for me, and bailed. And then Tom Cruise actually asked, and I recount this in my book, when we were in Madrid, and this big organization being created in Madrid because Penelope was now big, important person. But she had left Tom before the grand opening of this building, but nevertheless, he was still there because Penelope's sister and mother and whatever were there. And I'm standing there talking to Tom Cruise, and he says, "Can you believe that Leanne can't find me a girlfriend?" Leanne is Tom's sister.
Right.
And she had become his public relations person. Right. And I'm sort of like, huh? And David Miscavige walks into the room and like, what are you guys talking about? And the next thing you know, there is a special project to find a girlfriend for Tom Cruise.
Right.
And there is a fascinating article in Vanity Fair about Nazanin Boniadi, who was the first recruit to be Tom Cruise's girlfriend and what happened to her. And it is horrifying.
Oh, it is. And it's also in the film, Going Clear.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mike.
I don't know how they ended up with Katie Holmes. I don't know. But I know Katie Holmes also had a dad who was, this time not a psychiatrist, but a lawyer specializing in family law. And she got out in a hurry and took Suri with her, and the rest is history.
This is a little bit sensitive, but it's in your book, so I'm going to ask. I know that Scientology has a very negative view of homosexuality. They perceive it as a sort of disease that should be treated or punished. I know that there are gay celebrities who are Scientologists who cannot come out, probably because they're afraid that it will ruin their career or that Scientologists will poison the public to them. You did discuss a case where you saw John Travolta kiss a Mel Masur on the mouth. What Do you know anything about Tom Cruise? That is it?
I don't think Tom Cruise is homosexual.
Okay, so that can't be.
I don't, not at all. I mean, his problem has always been the other direction. He's like too many women.
Oh wow. Okay, interesting. You've been free of Scientology, as we said earlier, for 16 years. After being a proponent for your whole life, or 50, or almost 50, do you still wrestle? You must still wrestle with some of the beliefs. Does any part of their ideology still exist within you today? Any remnants?
I honestly, Brian, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
I have tried very, very diligently to eradicate as much of that as I possibly could. Of course, when you are raised with a system of thinking about life, it's sometimes hard to realize that you're looking at something through those glasses still. And every now and then I kind of catch myself going, is that real, or is that true, or is that what I learned from being raised in Scientology? I don't, I mean, I guess the only thing that I carry with me from Scientology, and perhaps it's really not from Scientology, it's from the Sea Org, is the idea that there is nothing that you cannot accomplish if you set your mind to it, and that you can persist and overcome things that happen that may not be good, and that there is nothing nothing in the world outside of Scientology that is as bad as the world inside Scientology. I remember when I got my first job selling cars, and a manager got really upset with some salesman and said, and he cursed at him. And it was like, oh my God, did you hear that? The manager just said shit. And it was like, oh my God, like big deal. Like, and I'm like,
context.
Seriously?
Get some context.
You guys are worried about that? That he didn't punch him in the face. That, like, what's the big deal? And and like, I would go in and I would work from 8 in the morning until 7 o'clock at night and think, oh, this is like I'm on vacation. And everybody else is going, why do you come in so early? Your shift is from 10 until 6. Why do you come early and stay late? I'm like, well, I want to sell more cars. And they're like, how do you do it? I'm like,
it's kind of a work ethic that was instilled.
Exactly. So that's something that I am thankful for.
We're going to start taking. Good. What would you say your spiritual beliefs generally are today? Are you still sort of trying to figure that out, or?
Well, I talk about that at the end of the book too. I have. I'm not a fan of organized religion of any description. I believe that you find. I believe that people join organized religions to find happiness and comfort and a sense of spiritual peace. I find that from doing what I believe is the right thing to do. And I guess that's my religion now. Do what I think is the right thing to do.
Decency.
And yes, be decent and kind and try and be empathetic. And I find that gives me great peace and happiness.
That's beautiful, and healthy, I think. We're going to take questions from Mike, so please start sending them in. I still have a few of my own while we wait. One of the outstanding cruelties in this book that chronicles so many cruelties is this anonymous email that you received 6 years after you had defected, informing you that your mother had passed away and that her services had already been held in 2013. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, this is pretty typical Scientology. I had gone to try and visit my mother when she was still alive, when I went to Australia in 2010, and she at that point was in an assisted living facility. And Scientology had PIs following me everywhere in Australia. So they knew I was coming and they whisked her away.
Hmm.
And I also talk in the book about what happened when my father died and how I had not gone home for that because I considered what I was doing in the Sea Org was more important. They knew that if I had heard that my mother was, dying in hospital or something, I would have gotten on the next plane.
Of course.
I now had the ability to do that. I could do that without anybody's permission. I had enough money to buy a ticket to go to Australia. I could get there and I would be there. And they didn't want that to happen. So nobody from my family contacted me when she passed. Nobody. Like you said, I got an anonymous email like a week after she had passed, saying just what you said. And I have talked about that, and at one point my brother said, "Oh, I let him know. How do you think he ever found out?" So I guess my brother sent the anonymous email once it was once everything was done and there was no point in me going.
Wow. I see the Emmy behind you over your shoulder. That was for the series Aftermath with Leah Remini.
Yeah.
And then you also ended up doing a podcast with her for
Yep.
Fair Game. How Leah also had inquired, I think in your book you detail this about Shelley Miscavige, and that was what ended up getting her expelled.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Like we were talking about the world of delusion in Scientology, it's also a world of you don't question up the command chart. And when Shelley disappeared, you've got to understand that she was a very, very prominent figure in the Scientology world. She was like the first lady of Scientology. When David Miscavige appeared somewhere, she was there. She was by his side. Not only that, she was the gatekeeper to David Miscavige. She was his personal assistant. So when she didn't show up for the wedding of the century, Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes in Italy, and Leah showed up, and Leah had been being badgered by Scientology. Oh, you've got to get J-Lo to come, and you've got to get Mark Antony to come, and you've got to get all your friends to come. And she had organized all this, and she shows up, and Shelley's not there. And she, of all the people, was the only one that said, "Where's Shelley?
Where's Shelley?
Why is Shelley not here?" Shelley wasn't only at the wedding of Tom and Nicole, she organized the whole thing.
Oh, gosh.
She organized all the Sea Org members to go to their house in Telluride and make the food and organize the transportation. She hired the people for Tom Cruise's household. She was like intimately involved in this, and it was such a strange thing, but that was a big no-no, and that was taken as an affront to the authority of David Miscavige. Nobody's allowed to ask about his wife. Like, why do you think you have any position to do that? Well, apart from the fact that she's my friend, I just kind of was curious.
It's astounding.
And she ended up in big trouble for that, and that was the beginning of the end for Leah.
For her. We do have some questions coming in, Mike. Thank you so much for this insightful discussion about your book and life inside and outside of Scientology. Can you speak to the current book bans being imposed on school and public libraries in the USA?
Yes, they should never be allowed under any circumstances anywhere for any book whatsoever.
That's a great statement. Very succinct and to the point, and and in no uncertain terms.
Censorship of books is Nazism.
Yeah, I agree. Here's another question. Is being a Scientologist a difficult life for a woman?
That's a terrific question. Not necessarily, but I have to answer this in a sort of a yes and a no. There is no official position that women cannot be in high positions in Scientology. In theory, a woman could be David Miscavige.
Right.
Shelley Miscavige could be the leader of Scientology.
Sure.
That is not something that's frowned upon or thought to be weird. On the other hand, the view of of women in the writings of L. Ron Hubbard is rather antiquated. His 1950s sort of the women's places in the home is pretty prevalent across the Scientology writings of Hubbard, and therefore it sort of seeps into the mindset of Scientologists. And we've seen a bit of this appearing in the Danny Masterson retrial that is ongoing, where these women who are the victims and have claimed that they've been raped report that they were told by Scientology, well, if you're his girlfriend, he can't rape you. You need to do what he wants. That's your job. That's your duty as a woman, as a girlfriend. So
it's appalling. Yeah. Hi, Mike, longtime observer of the anti-Scientology movement for years and years. Really appreciate you doing this talk. How big is Scientology in 2023? What's their goal now?
Well, as I said, Scientology has become a real estate empire more than anything else, just buying buildings and empty buildings. What is their goal? Their goal, believe it or not, is still to clear the planet. I mean, after 70 years, they haven't cleared 10,000 people, and they're still talking about how they're going to clear the planet. 8 billion people, they're all going to be cleared. And it's so unreal. It's ridiculous. But I would say right now, their goal is just to survive.
Yeah.
The public perception of Scientology has gone on a St. Moritz death slide. That's one of the expressions that Hubbard liked to use. Straight down the mountain. And the internet has made it impossible virtually for them to get new people in. So they are trying to figure out how to remain relevant and literally survive.
Can you speak about what you think it was that drew your parents into Scientology? Do you wish that they had never become involved? And I know you did say in your book, you did write in your book, that your family now is mainly made up of fellow Scientologists who left, and you don't see your biological family at all.
Right. That's my family of choice.
Family of choice.
Not my biological family. And I think what drew my parents in is what drew a lot of people in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, which was the promise of self-help. This is what Hubbard promised. He promised you could help yourself, but also that you could help other people, that you would learn the technology, as he called it, of how to make it through life and be able to assist others, your friends, your family, your spouse, your children, everybody and anybody to lead a better, happier life. And to empathetic people, that is a very, very attractive proposition. You don't play to them just helping themselves. You play to them being able to help other people.
I mean, it's a beautiful altruistic idea, to help yourself and to help others.
Absolutely.
And so much of the sort of new age positive pop psychology movement is built on that. And it's not inherently a bad thing. But when I guess someone sort of comes along and says, I have all the answers to all the questions and all the solutions, be wary, right? Because that is cult,
be very wary.
That's cult speak. So I think we had one more. There's been a lot of recent media coverage on artificial intelligence and such software as ChatGPT. Can you see how this could be another tool for the Church of Scientology? It's an interesting idea.
It is an interesting idea. Gosh, I don't know, because one of the problems that Scientology has is that it is stuck with the writings of L. Ron Hubbard,
Mhm.
and nobody is allowed to change those.
I was going to ask, you can't revise, right? It's fixed. That's it.
It's
Okay.
done.
Yeah.
What he said is it. That is all there is. And so, creative writing, I mean, I guess that they could get Chat GPT to come up with some theories about how Scientology is really taken over the world.
Hmm.
But they do that. They do a pretty good job of that themselves.
So, yeah.
Chat GPT wouldn't actually add anything to that equation. I don't see it.
Okay. We actually do have one more. I'm sorry. Do
Okay.
you think more people are more aware of cults since QAnon and Trumpism in general than they were in the past?
I don't know. I that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that that many or a lot of people believe that QAnon, or they probably more people believe that QAnon is a cult. I'm not sure that that many people believe that Trumpism is a cult.
Hmm.
People's connotation of what cults are is generally more they're in the field of religion and getting people to believe in a guru that has philosophical positions rather than political positions. So I'm not sure. Maybe it has, but I think that more so the exposure that has occurred with doc series, not only on Scientology, but on NXIVM, on the Rajneesh, on the
Oh, yes.
Bikram yoga, on the Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, there had been the Mormons. I mean, Under the Banner of Heaven wasn't even a documentary, and that was an incredible expose of the mind of fanatical fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, and those things is what I believe have raised the awareness generally in society of cults. Waco. I mean, there's been like now 3 docs about Waco
Just in the last month alone, because we're at
Yeah.
the anniversary now.
Right.
There is just one more question about the movie The Master by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman. That, I guess, is unofficially about L. Ron Hubbard, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's all known. It's not a
And
secret.
believe it or not, Brian, I've never watched it.
Oh, really?
I don't
By
need to
design,
watch
or you just-
someone else.
You know,
I don't need to watch someone. It just doesn't interest me. I don't need to watch someone else's imagination of a fictional L. Ron Hubbard. I knew the real guy.
Yeah, you lived it. You lived it. To learn more about Mike Rinder and his work, visit Mike's YouTube channel and blog, the link to which are in our comments section. The links to both are in our comments section. The book is A Billion Years, My Escape from a Life in the Highest Ranks of Scientology. Mike, thank you so very much for your time this evening. It was extremely insightful and shocking and moving.
Well, thank you, Brian. I like I told you before we came on, anything that I can do that supports libraries, I am a huge fan of.
Well,
I
thank you. We
love
appreciate that.
libraries. I think libraries are a pillar of society. I don't think any book should ever be banned. I'm 100% in the library, on the library team.
Well, we absolutely agree with you, and it's the greatest pushback against any kind of indoctrination, I think.
I agree 100%.
All right. Well, thank you, Mike, again so much. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Have a good, safe weekend.